Have you ever stopped for a second and wondered at what point someone stops being just a person and starts becoming something we can't fully understand? Because the truth is uncomfortable. People don't wake up one day completely changed. It doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly, quietly, in environments that, from the outside, look completely normal. And the most disturbing part? Sometimes no one notices. Until it's too late. Today, you're about to hear a real story. One that doesn't feel real, but it is. A story that, even decades later, still leaves a strange weight in the air. A story that forces one question. How did this go unnoticed before everything changed? Before the headlines, before the shock, before the world even knew his name, he was just a boy. And maybe that's where everything begins. He was born in 1906 in a quiet rural area. The kind of place where life moves slowly, where nothing ever seems to happen, where people know each other and routine becomes identity. But inside his home, things were different. His mother was strict. Not just strict in the usual way, but deeply controlling. She believed the world was corrupt, that people were dangerous, and that almost everything outside their home was wrong, especially women, except for herself. She raised her children to fear the world, to avoid connection, to distrust people. Imagine growing up like that for a second. No friends, no emotional freedom, no outside perspective. The only voice guiding you is the same voice every single day, telling you what's right, what's wrong, what's dangerous, and who you can trust. He had an older brother, and unlike him, his brother questioned things. He noticed the environment wasn't normal. He pushed back, but not him. He didn't question. He absorbed. He listened. He believed. To him, his mother wasn't just a parent. She was everything. Safety, truth, structure. The only place where the world made sense. And when a child builds their entire identity around one person, that connection doesn't stay healthy. It becomes something else, something deeper, something fragile. While other kids were outside playing, learning, building friendships, he stayed inside. The routine never changed. School, home, and long, intense lectures. His mother would read to them, but not stories of hope, not comfort, not warmth. She focused on punishment, consequences, judgment, fear. She reinforced one idea over and over. Desire is dangerous, connection leads to suffering, and the world cannot be trusted. Now think about what that does to a child's mind. Because feelings don't disappear just because they're denied. They stay, they build, they get buried. And when they're buried long enough, they don't go away. They transform. As he grew older, people started noticing something. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't loud. He wasn't disruptive. He was off. Loco 010, quiet, disconnected. Sometimes he would laugh alone. Other times, he seemed distant, like he wasn't fully present. Like part of him was somewhere else. But no one saw danger. Just a strange boy. And that's important. Because danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks harmless. Inside the house, things weren't better. His father was absent, emotionally distant, lost in his own habits. There was no guidance, no balance, no stability. Only one dominant voice. His mother's. And when one person controls everything, there's no space for growth. Only obedience. Years passed, and eventually, his father died. The house became even quieter, more isolated, more controlled. The world outside felt even further away. He and his brother started working small jobs, trying to survive, trying to create something outside of that environment. But the influence never left. His mother remained the center, the reference, the rule. But his brother started changing. He wanted out. He wanted distance. He saw what was happening, and more than that, He saw what it was doing to his younger brother. He tried to open his eyes, tried to show him there was more. That life didn't have to be like that. But it didn't work. Because when someone becomes your entire reality, questioning them feels impossible. It feels like losing everything. And then something happened. Something that, even today, raises questions. A fire broke out on their property. Chaos, confusion, smoke everywhere. In the middle of it, his brother disappeared. Hours later, he was found gone. Officially, it was ruled as an accident, but something didn't sit right. The details didn't fully match. There were signs that suggested more, but no investigation went deeper. No answers were pursued. And just like that, it ended. Now it was just him and his mother, completely alone. No one left to question. No one left to interfere. And that connection, already intense, became absolute. Stronger than ever. And then, not long after, everything changed again. His mother became ill. And for the first time, he took on a new role. Caregiver. He devoted himself completely. Every moment, every need, every detail. His world became even smaller, even more focused. Because now, he didn't just depend on her. He felt like she depended on him. And that kind of emotional loop is powerful. It reinforces everything. It deepens attachment. It removes distance until there's no separation left. And then the moment came. She passed away. And for the first time in his life, he was completely alone. No guidance, no structure, no voice telling him what the world meant. Just silence. And that silence wasn't peaceful. It was empty. Because when your identity is built around one person, and that person is gone, what's left? That's the question. And in his case, the answer is what turned this story into something impossible to forget. Because what came next wasn't immediate. It started quietly, subtly, almost invisible. But it was there, growing, shifting, changing, and no one had any idea that something was beginning. After she died, the house didn't just become empty. It became something else. Because silence, when it stays too long, it changes. At first, nothing seemed unusual. From the outside, life looked the same. He still lived there, still kept to himself, still spoke politely when spoken to, still did small jobs around town. To most people, he was just a quiet man who lived alone. A little strange, but harmless. And that word matters. Harmless. Because it creates comfort. It removes suspicion. It makes people stop looking deeper. But inside that house, something was shifting. Something slow. Something no one could see. After his mother passed, he made a decision. Not a loud one. Not something he told anyone. But something that would define everything that came next. He began closing off parts of the house. Literally. Rooms were locked, sealed, left untouched, as if time itself wasn't allowed inside. Especially one room, her room. It remained perfect, clean, organized, frozen. Like she had just stepped out for a moment and could return at any second. That room became something sacred, untouchable, unchanged. But the rest of the house was different. Messy, neglected, falling apart. It was like two realities existed under the same roof. One preserved in the past, the other slowly collapsing. And he lived between them. Now think about that. Living in a place where part of your world is frozen and the rest is deteriorating. That does something to the mind. It distorts time. It blurs reality. It creates confusion between what is and what used to be. And over time, that confusion grows. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and isolation became complete. No close relationships, no emotional connection, no one checking in, no one asking questions. And when no one is watching, limits disappear. he started spending more time alone. Long hours inside that house, with his thoughts. And thoughts, when left alone for too long, don't always stay quiet. They evolve, they expand, they take space. He began reading more, but not ordinary things, not stories, not news. He was drawn to specific subjects, things most people avoid, topics that carry discomfort, that create unease. But to him, they didn't seem disturbing. They seemed interesting. Curiosity replaced hesitation, and slowly, interest became fixation. Now, here's the important part. He didn't change overnight. There was no sudden shift, no visible break. Everything happened gradually, step by step, layer by layer. And that's what made it invisible. To everyone else, he was still the same. Quiet, polite, distant. But inside, something new was forming. Something that didn't exist before. Or maybe something that was always there, but finally had space to grow. Without his mother, there were no rules anymore. No voice correcting him. No structure. No boundaries. Just silence. And in that silence, his mind started creating its own logic, its own direction, its own purpose. He began going out at night. Not often, not in a way that attracted attention. Just enough to go unnoticed. Loco 034. The town was small. People didn't expect anything unusual. And that expectation made it easier. He visited places most people avoid after dark. Quiet places, still places. Places connected to memory, to loss, to absence. At first, it was just observation. Standing there, looking, thinking, trying to understand something he couldn't explain. But observation didn't stay observation. Because curiosity, when it's not controlled, pushes further. It asks for more. And eventually, watching wasn't enough. Something inside him wanted interaction. Something physical. Something real. And that's when the line started to blur. Between thought and action, he developed an idea. Not a clear one, not fully formed, but strong enough to guide him. He wanted to bring something back, not emotionally, not symbolically, physically, his mother, or at least the feeling of her presence. Now think about how far someone has to go mentally to believe that's possible, to believe something like that can be recreated. But when someone loses their only connection to the world and doesn't know how to process that loss, they don't move forward. They try to go backward. And when reality doesn't allow that, they create their own version of it. That's what he did. He started collecting things, objects, materials, items that, to him, served a purpose, but to anyone else wouldn't make sense. He worked with his hands. That was something he always knew how to do. Build, fix, assemble. And now he used those skills differently. Not for survival, not for work, but for something else. Something personal, something hidden, something no one would understand. And for a long time, no one did, because no one was looking. Life in the town continued as usual. People followed routines, went to work, talked about normal things. And in the middle of all that, he blended in. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to avoid attention. Enough to stay invisible. But then, small things started happening. Nothing dramatic, nothing immediate, just absences. A person no longer seen. A routine interrupted. At first, it didn't mean much. People leave. People move. People disappear from small towns more quietly than we think. But when it happens more than once, something changes. A feeling. Hard to explain, but noticeable. Like something isn't right. Like something is off. But without proof, that feeling doesn't go far. It stays in the background, unspoken, ignored. And while everyone tried to make sense of those inconsistencies, he continued. Quietly, carefully, without urgency. Because to him, this wasn't chaos. It was purpose, and purpose creates patience. Now imagine living a double reality. Outside, you are just another face. Inside, you are building something no one knows exists. Something that would shock anyone who saw it. And yet, no one did, because there were no interruptions, no inspections, no reason for anyone to enter that space. His house became exactly what he needed it to be. Hidden, isolated, untouched. A place where his ideas could exist without interference. And over time, those ideas became more complex, more structured, more defined. It wasn't random anymore. It was intentional. There was a goal, a vision, even if only he understood it. But here's the thing. When something grows in isolation, without limits, without correction, without reality pushing back, it doesn't stay small. It expands. And eventually, it reaches a point where it can't stay hidden forever. Because even the most silent patterns leave traces. And those traces were about to be noticed. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but enough to start raising questions. And once questions begin, everything starts to change. Because silence only protects something for so long. And in this case, that silence was about to break. At first, it didn't feel like a major event. Just another day. Another routine. Another normal moment in a small, quiet town. But sometimes, the days that seem the most ordinary are the ones that change everything. He walked into the store like he had done before. Nothing unusual. No urgency. No sign that anything was different. He spoke casually, made small conversation, even joked in a way that felt slightly off, but not alarming. That was the thing about him. He never crossed the line in a way that made people stop and react. He stayed just within the boundaries of strange, but not dangerous. And that's exactly why no one stopped him. That day, he made a comment. He invited the woman behind the counter to go out with him. It sounded almost playful, almost like something said without much thought. But for someone like him, that behavior didn't match. He wasn't social. He didn't flirt. He didn't engage like that. So even though it sounded casual, it left a strange impression. Something subtle. Something easy to ignore, but hard to fully dismiss. Still, life continued. The conversation moved on. Nothing escalated. Nothing broke the surface. Before leaving, he asked one more question. Simple, direct. Will you be open tomorrow? She said yes. And he replied that he would come back. That was it. Just a normal interaction. The kind of moment that disappears into memory without meaning. Until later, because when people looked back, that conversation felt different. It felt heavy, like it had been pointing to something no one understood at the time. The next day, everything changed. She didn't show up. At first, it wasn't alarming. People are late. Plans change. Things happen. But time passed, and the store stayed empty. The door wasn't locked. The place wasn't closed properly. Something was wrong. Not obvious, not chaotic, but wrong. And when her son arrived, that feeling became real. There were signs. Small details. Things out of place. Not destroyed, not chaotic, but interrupted. Like something had happened quickly and left no time to fix it. Now think about that moment. Standing inside a familiar place that suddenly feels unfamiliar. Like something invisible has shifted. That's when concern becomes something else. Something heavier. Something harder to ignore. The police were called. At first, it was still treated carefully. A missing person. A situation to understand. Not yet something extreme. But then they started retracing steps. Looking at who had been there last. Looking for patterns. And one name came up. His. At first, it didn't seem like much. He was a customer. He had been there before. Nothing unusual. But then they found something. The last item recorded was exactly what he said he would buy. That detail, small as it was, connected him to the final moment she was seen. And when you combine that with his behavior the day before, the invitation, the unusual tone, the timing, it starts forming a picture. Not a clear one, but enough to raise a question. And sometimes, one question is all it takes. The police decided to go to his property. At first, there was hesitation, because again, he wasn't seen as dangerous. Just odd, just quiet, just different. But different doesn't trigger urgency, not until something forces it. They arrived, knocked, waited. Nothing. No answer. No movement. Just silence. That same silence that had been building for years, now standing right in front of them. They looked around. The house stood there, still, closed, disconnected, like it existed in its own space, untouched, unobserved. They left, but something didn't sit right. And when something feels off, it doesn't go away. It stays. It pushes. It returns. Later that day, they came back. This time with more intent, more attention, more readiness. The sheriff himself decided to go, and that decision changed everything. It was already dark. The kind of darkness that feels heavier in rural places where there are no street lights, no movement, only shadows and distant sounds. They approached the property slowly, carefully, every step measured. Not out of fear yet, but uncertainty, because they still didn't know what they were about to face, and that unknown made everything feel heavier. The house stood ahead, quiet, unresponsive, almost disconnected from the world around it. Nothing visibly wrong, nothing clearly alarming, but something felt off. The sheriff made a decision. Instead of entering the house first, he turned his attention to a smaller structure nearby, a shed that looked simple, almost irrelevant at first glance. But something about it pulled his attention. Maybe instinct, maybe experience, maybe something he wouldn't be able to explain later. The door was slightly open, just enough to create a sense of unease. And that small detail was the first real sign that something wasn't right, something that didn't match a normal situation. He stepped closer, slowly, and pushed the door open. Inside, it was dark, completely dark. He raised his flashlight, and the beam cut through the space, revealing shapes little by little. At first, nothing made sense. Just outlines, objects, shadows that didn't immediately connect into anything familiar. And then something appeared, a shape, something hanging, something out of place. The mind tries to understand, tries to turn it into something normal, something explainable. But it couldn't, because what was there didn't belong to anything ordinary. And as the light moved, clarity started to form. And with that clarity came shock, because what stood in front of him was not something anyone expects to see, not in real life, not in a place like that, not anywhere. It was her, the woman from the store. And the way she was there told a story far beyond a disappearance, far beyond a single act, something much deeper and more disturbing. In that moment, everything changed. This was no longer a search, no longer a question, no longer uncertainty. This was something else entirely, something darker. The sheriff stepped back, not as an officer, but as a person, because there are moments where training disappears and reality takes over completely. Moments where the mind refuses to process what it's seeing, and that was one of them. He left the building, trying to breathe, trying to understand, trying to regain control. But some images don't leave that easily. And even before entering the main house, he already knew something important. This wasn't just one incident. This wasn't isolated. This was something bigger. Something that had been happening for a long time. Hidden, unnoticed, building in silence. And now it was finally revealed. But they still had to go inside the house. And what they were about to find there would go beyond anything they had imagined. Because sometimes the first discovery is only the beginning. They already knew something was wrong, but nothing could have prepared them for what was waiting inside. The door opened slowly, without resistance, without any sign of forced entry, just access. And that alone was unsettling, because it meant one thing. Whatever existed inside had not been hidden by force, but by silence. They stepped in carefully, flashlights scanning the darkness, revealing a space that felt heavy, stale, almost untouched by time. At first, it looked like chaos. Objects scattered, furniture out of place, dust covering everything. But as they looked closer, something became clear. This wasn't random. It wasn't simple neglect. There was intention. Every object, every position, every detail seemed to follow a logic, even if it didn't make sense yet. Now imagine walking into a place where nothing feels familiar, where your mind tries to understand but fails. That's what it felt like. Room by room, they moved deeper, slowly, carefully, trying to stay focused, trying to remain professional. But the deeper they went, the harder that became. Because what they were seeing wasn't just unusual, it was disturbing in a way that doesn't fade easily. Objects that didn't belong, materials that shouldn't be there, items altered, reassembled, transformed. At first, you don't fully understand what you're looking at, but then recognition begins. Slow, uncomfortable, inevitable recognition. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's when the shift happens, from confusion to realization, from curiosity to shock. Because this wasn't just a house. It was something else entirely. It was a reflection, a physical representation of a mind completely disconnected from reality. And every room told a piece of that story. They found furniture, but not ordinary furniture. They found objects, but not objects anyone would recognize as normal. Everything pointed to one thing: construction. Not destruction, not chaos. Creation, but creation of something no one could accept. Now think about that. Someone wasn't just acting. He was building, working, spending time, effort, and focus on something deeply personal, something intentional, something that followed a logic only he understood. And that's what made it even more unsettling. This wasn't random behavior. It was structured. There was a system, a pattern, a goal, even if no one else could see it. As they continued through the house, they noticed something else, something that stood out from everything around it. A contrast. One room completely untouched, clean, organized, frozen in time. His mother's room, perfect, preserved, like nothing had ever changed, like she was still there, watching, present. That room felt different, not just physically, but emotionally. It carried weight, respect, almost reverence. And that told them everything they needed to know. This wasn't just strange behavior. This was obsession. A connection that didn't end, even after death. Something that remained active, guiding everything that followed. And suddenly, everything they had seen before started making sense, but in the worst possible way. Because now they understood the center of it all. Everything pointed back to her. Every action, every object, every decision. It all led to the same place, the same figure, the same loss. And that realization was heavier than anything they had seen physically. Because it meant this wasn't just about what he did. It was about why. And why is always harder to face. As they moved through the house, they documented everything carefully, trying to stay focused, trying to do their job. But the emotional weight was impossible to ignore. Some officers had to step outside. Others stayed silent. No one spoke more than necessary. Because there are moments where words don't help, where explanation doesn't exist, only presence, only impact. Now imagine carrying that with you, not just as a memory, but as something you experienced firsthand. Something you saw, something you walked through. That doesn't go away. And for those officers, It never did. But even with everything they found, one thing remained. The person responsible. He wasn't there, not in the house, not on the property, which created another layer of tension. Because now they knew what had happened, but they hadn't faced him yet. And that moment was coming fast. They expanded the search, asked questions, checked nearby homes, and eventually they found him. Not hiding, not running, not panicking. Just sitting at a neighbor's house, at the dinner table, eating, talking, like nothing had happened. Now pause for a second, because this is one of the most unsettling parts of the entire story. While everything was being discovered, while the reality of that house was unfolding, he was having dinner, calm, relaxed, present, as if the two realities had nothing to do with each other. And when they approached him, there was no resistance, no confusion, no attempt to escape. He simply stood up and went with them. No questions, no denial, no reaction. And that confused them even more, because people expect emotion, fear, stress, desperation, but he showed none of it. Just quiet acceptance, as if this moment had always been part of the plan. He was taken in, and now the investigation moved to its next stage, the part where answers come directly from him. But sometimes, answers don't bring clarity. Sometimes they make things worse, because hearing something in the voice of the person who lived it is very different from discovering it. And what he was about to say would change everything. Not because it added shock, but because it revealed something deeper, something harder to understand. When he sat down for questioning, there was no tension in his body, no visible fear, no urgency, just stillness. And that's what made everything heavier for the people in that room, because they had just come from that house. They had seen things they couldn't process, things that would stay with them. And now, the person responsible was sitting calmly in front of them, as if none of it carried weight. The questions began carefully, controlled, because he wasn't confused, he wasn't lost. He knew exactly what he was saying, but he spoke about everything as if it were ordinary, like describing routine, daily habits, simple actions. There was no emotion in his voice, no shift in tone, no sign that he understood the impact of his words. Now think about that, not just what he did, but how he perceived it. Because sometimes the most disturbing part isn't the action itself, but the absence of awareness, the absence of weight. He talked about patterns, routines, how things developed over time. Nothing impulsive, nothing sudden. Everything had a rhythm, a structure, a logic that only made sense inside his mind. He explained how his thoughts changed after his mother died, how the silence affected him, how the absence didn't feel like something he could accept. So instead of moving forward, he tried to recreate what he lost, not emotionally, but physically. That was the break from reality, because grief, for most people, is something you learn to carry. But for him, it became something he tried to undo. And when reality doesn't allow that, the mind looks for alternatives, even if they don't make sense to anyone else. He described his visits, the places he went, the choices he made, always calm, always consistent. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, as if every step had already been accepted long ago. And the officers listening struggled to stay focused, because hearing it was different from seeing it. Seeing creates shock, but hearing creates understanding. And understanding can be even more disturbing. At one point, the sheriff couldn't take it anymore. He reacted, not as an officer, but as a person. Because there's a limit to how much someone can hear without breaking that line. But even that didn't change him. He remained the same, still, quiet, detached, as if the reaction in the room didn't fully reach him. And that was one of the clearest signs. He wasn't operating in the same emotional reality. There was a gap between action and meaning, between behavior and consequence. And that gap is what made the case so complex. Because it wasn't just about responsibility, it was about capacity, about whether he truly understood what he had done. And that question would shape everything that came next. Psychological evaluations began, involving specialists and experts, trying to analyze something that didn't fit clear categories. Because on one side, there was organization, planning, repetition. On the other, distortion, disconnection, and a break from reality. He didn't show aggression. He didn't display rage. There was no typical pattern. Instead, there was emptiness paired with obsession. A very specific obsession. His mother. Everything led back to her. Every explanation, every justification, every thought. It was like his entire identity never moved past that connection, even after her death. And that raised one of the most difficult questions in the case. Where does influence end and responsibility begin? Because his environment shaped him. Isolation, control, fear, lack of connection. All of it played a role. But at the same time, actions were taken. Decisions were made. And those decisions had consequences. Real ones. Irreversible ones. And the law needed to define that line. The process wasn't quick. It took years, because this wasn't a simple case. It required evaluation, re-evaluation, and long-term observation. And during all that time, he remained consistent. No major changes, no emotional shifts, no sudden realizations, just the same calm presence day after day, which only reinforced one thing. This wasn't temporary. It wasn't a moment of lost control. This was a state of mind, a permanent one. Eventually, a conclusion was reached. He was not mentally capable of standing trial in the traditional sense. Now pause and think about that, because for many people, that feels incomplete. Like something is missing. Like justice hasn't fully happened. And that's what made this case so difficult. There was no simple resolution. No clear closure. Only a different path. He was sent to a psychiatric institution. Not as punishment, but as containment. As protection. For society, and in a way, for himself. And that decision divided opinions. Some believed it was necessary. Others believed it wasn't enough. But one thing was certain. Nothing about this case fit into a normal framework. And nothing about the outcome felt completely satisfying. Because when something goes this far, there's no outcome that truly balances it. Only outcomes that try to manage what remains. And while the legal process continued, something else was happening outside. The story was spreading. And the more it spread, the more people became drawn to it. Not just out of shock, but curiosity. People wanted to understand. To make sense of something that didn't seem to have a clear explanation. But understanding doesn't always bring comfort. Sometimes it just raises more questions. And in this case, those questions lasted for decades. Because this wasn't just a crime. It was a reflection of how far the human mind can go when it loses connection to reality. And maybe even more disturbing, how long that process can go unnoticed. But the story was far from over. Because even after everything, there was still one final layer. One that reached beyond the case itself, into memory, into culture, into how we understand stories like this. Because some stories don't end when the case is closed. They evolve, they spread, they take on a life of their own over time. And this one did exactly that. It moved beyond the people directly involved and reached a much wider audience, crossing boundaries and becoming something far greater than a single case. Writers began studying it closely, analyzing patterns, behavior, and psychological elements. From that, they created fictional characters inspired by those same ideas. Not exact copies, but clearly influenced. And those stories reached millions of people who never even knew the real origin behind them. And that creates a strange contrast. Because fiction has the power to reshape things, to soften them, to make them easier to process and understand. But reality doesn't do that. Reality remains raw, unfiltered, uncomfortable, and often much harder to fully accept or even comprehend. At the same time, the people who experienced it directly never moved on in the same way. For them, it didn't become just a story. It stayed a memory, something real, something permanent, something that didn't fade with time or distance like it did for everyone else. The emotional weight didn't disappear. It stayed present in moments, in thoughts, in memories that returned without warning. And that is something most people never see or think about. The after effect, the part that lingers long after everything else is over. Because when the world moves on, the people closest to it don't always get that chance. They carry it with them, in silence, in reflection. And that is part of the story too, even if it is rarely told or fully understood by those on the outside. He remained in the institution for years, then decades. His behavior didn't change much over time. He stayed quiet, calm, stable, almost routine. And that created another layer of discomfort for those who tried to understand him. Because how can someone connected to something so disturbing appear so normal? That contrast challenged expectations. It forced people to rethink what danger actually looks like, and whether it always appears the way we expect. There were no outbursts, no visible instability, no dramatic behavior, just presence, just silence. And that made everything harder to define, harder to categorize, and even harder to fully understand. Time passed, the world changed, new stories emerged, but this one never fully disappeared. It remained present in memory, in conversations, in references, and in the questions it continued to raise over the years. And maybe that is exactly why it still matters today, because it doesn't offer a clean answer or a simple conclusion. Instead, it offers reflection about people, about behavior, about what we notice and what we choose to ignore. Because sometimes the most disturbing part of the story isn't what happened. It's how long it took for anyone to realize it was happening. And maybe the real question isn't just about him, but about how many things around us remain unseen until it's too late.